Welcome back to the Kingsway Podcast.
Welcome.
Good to see you again, Ryan.
Yeah.
Back at it again.
Yeah. We've been kind of on and off with how we're putting out these episodes. Just so you know, it's the summer.
That's the best explanation
that's the
ever.
reason.
Well, and even like next week, we're trying to get everybody on board and stuff. It's going to be an interesting, but we're going to keep cracking at it. We're going to keep going. That's we're just trying to create these as we have time and opportunity, and then we'll put them out there on the internet forever. So
what's tough is we're creating the demand once a week, but we have the ability to put out 2 every other week, which is once a week, but like,
well, it's kind of like the binging of a podcast.
Yeah,
that's what it's going to be.
Yeah.
Well, we're back at it. Sunday study hall.
Here we go.
Well, we're continuing our journey down Matthew, the hallway of Matthew.
Yes.
The Matthew path. The
Pathu.
The Pathu, the way, some would say.
Hey. I think some would say that.
And we're kind of getting to the meat of stuff here. We're not pulling punches today.
This is the scarier part of the Sermon on the Mount. Maybe not scarier, but just like
probably the hardest. I would say the hardest section.
Yeah, you're touching on a lot of really sensitive stuff.
Nobody likes to read these ones.
No.
Like they're like, can we leave these ones out? That would be a lot easier.
These are the buzzkill parts of
well, and like I don't know, this was like I felt like this is what every youth pastor I grew up on taught on, like constantly. This was like pounded into me all the time, constantly.
Before we get any further with just vaguely describing what's happening,
Matthew 5:21 through 37.
Let me. I was going to ask if you have a Bible in front of you, but you don't. That sounded very judgmental.
I can read whatever you want. What do you want?
I was just going to say the section headings for this section. They are, and this isn't in the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus preached.
Adultery, divorce, and oaths.
Yeah. My NLT on Bible Gateway says, anger, adultery, divorce, and vows.
Interesting.
It's pretty much the same.
Pretty much the same.
Hey, yeah, okay. Okay, so now to everybody's favorite part of
and my least favorite part.
It's still my favorite part. Next week, it may not be my favorite part.
I was going to say.
We'll let you find out why. Anyway, we have 1:30 on the clock that is very large and visible. If you're on YouTube, you can totally see it, I hope. I'm going to try to get out of the light. Okay, and Trevor, for everybody who wasn't there on Sunday, or if you don't go to our church and you haven't heard these sermons, we're going to catch you up to speed on what he preached on so that we don't have to cover that ground again. And we're going to do it in 90 seconds. So are you ready?
I'm ready to the best of my ability. This is a huge section to try to cover in 90 seconds.
It was a huge section to cover in 35 minutes.
Oh, my gosh. Yep.
Okay.
So, here we go.
3, 2, 1, go.
Your righteousness must be greater than or better than the Pharisees. The kingdom of heaven. You have heard it said, and then these 4 things. You have heard it said not to murder. I tell you, no, don't have anger. Don't call your brother Raka. Fix the relationships with your brother before me. You have heard it, don't commit adultery. I say no, if you look at a woman, you commit lust, you're actually committing the sin. You don't divorce. God hates divorce. Don't do it. Oaths, don't swear on anything. If your character and who you are does not describe what you're doing, don't do it. That's the 4 sections. We chose to see this as a way to look beyond the external of the things. So not just am I murdering or am I committing adultery, but the heart of it, the internal. And then we chose to say, are we looking at the causes or are we looking at symptoms? The symptoms are the thoughts or the adultery, but the cause is we are not in line with God. And so the thought process of this whole sermon was coming down to this thought process of, what if we switched this list? What if we made this list around something? Because we recognize these things are good things. If we all loved well and did not lust, if we all forgave and did not have anger in our hearts, but offered compassion and grace, if all of us just told the truth, if all of our relationships stayed together and we worked things out, it would be better. The kingdom of heaven is about recognizing Jesus wants that for everyone.
Yeah. There we go.
Boom.
Yeah. I think you described it this way in the sermon,
Mm-hmm.
in the sermon about the sermon. But it's like the old laws, the old rules were, and I think God even says this in the Old Testament a couple places, they were curbing the worst that humans would do. They were saying, this is the line that holds you back from the worst thing. But then, as people got more and more comfortable, they loved living right next to that fence and living in evil and sin and things that tear down God's creation and distort it and twist it.
Yep.
God through Jesus was like, that ain't it. That is not where righteousness is. It's just not past the fence of total oblivion of sin, like of adultery, murder. Like, don't live right next to that.
Well, and that's what we talked about the last week is like, am I asking how close can I get to heaven but still stay on earth? Or am I asking how close can I get to heaven while still on earth?
Yeah.
And the difference is just you're wanting to get as close to sin as possible while getting the reward of what righteousness is. It's the equation type mentality. It's like putting in the right actions so that I get the right thing. It's not leveraging and recognizing relationship. Relationship with God is what the ultimate change is going to be. And Jesus is driving to that. And the relationship is going to take this faith interaction where all of a sudden we recognize that we cannot do this stuff and we're going to need Jesus to do what we could not. And then that bridge with him is what's actually going to provide the kingdom of heaven to be born.
Yeah.
And so it's, we talked about this a ton and in so many different ways, but in our preaching meeting, but the concept of like the garden being a place where it wasn't covering the earth in Genesis when Adam and Eve got there, but their job was then to take the garden and expand it over the rest of the earth. Jesus, in so many ways here, is talking about a garden that we've never seen and that we have never had access to, but that we were supposed to. And so it like calls to our hearts. Like you can tell these are things that we all want, but it feels so utopian that we can't believe
feels so
that
impossible.
Yes, it feels so beyond what we could do that we can't even think of a place without lust, without anger, without lies, without brokenness. And so it's a struggle, even though we like the idea of it, like we like the concept.
I've heard the trope that a lot of younger people are getting into socialism and communism, and a lot of older people are like, that's a false hope and whatever. And politics and political systems aside, what we can see in any truth in that trope of those two people groups is exactly what you just said. We want for things to be equal and for nobody to need anything. We would prefer that strongly over people to need stuff and to like subject them to that.
Yep.
We want for justice to be perfectly administered. We want for care for the weak. But like, is that possible with our human strength? Maybe not. But it's in there because that's what we were made for.
Yep.
And we feel the tension because we feel the gap between us and that world.
I mean, look no further than our desires for food. And I think it easily just shows like the healthiest, best things for you, are good for you. You don't like the taste.
Yeah.
And you don't have a desire. You're not like wake up like craving broccoli. Like you're just like, oh man, gotta have it. Mm-hmm. But the thing that like would kill you, or it's like the homemade cinnamon roll with tons of butter, tons of icing, dipped in chocolate, you're like, you don't want to try that right now. Like, give it to me,
Yeah, and you eat 4 of those and you're seeing Jesus. Like,
and I mean, it gets you there sooner. And I guess in my mind, I'm just kind of like, what is that? Like, why is it that way? Like, what has happened? And so I think, without going, I think going a little bit further into the details and the weeds is where you start to see like, I broke down a lot of these categories in different ways, and I want to let you ask some questions. You can, And so trying to get into that and break it down was fun. It was fun to do in the sermon. It really was. And if you didn't listen to it, I highly encourage you to go back. It was like you said, it's like walking around a minefield a little bit. It is. You're just like, get in, get out. But it's also really impactful and powerful. And a lot of people have brokenness, hurt, their own regrets in a lot of these categories. So, and continue to struggle.
Yeah. This is a sermon that I remember you saying you could preach, or it could be preached in a bunch of different ways and get at the same things and get at the same topics, but you could come at it from a lot of different angles. Knowing how you did preach it, what would you change about the sermon that you preached?
I don't know if I'd change everything, but I think there's just a part of me that wanted to maybe slow down a little bit more.
Yeah.
I
felt that.
I think it was just too much too fast. And at the end of it, I just thought, man, I think this is really good, but it probably didn't have the opportunity to be as impactful because we didn't slow down enough. So it's kind of like driving through the national park rather than like stopping to smell the flowers. Like you saw everything.
Stopping to see the bears.
Yeah. Like but you saw everything, but it just wasn't the same.
I've said this on the past couple episodes. I think every single one. But I had to teach on this for our high schoolers at a little Branson retreat thing over the winter a year plus ago. And in that, it's not a 1 hour service or 1 hour, 10-minute or whatever where people are getting to lunch. It's like everybody's stuck there.
Yeah.
So I had the freedom to ramble. I had the freedom to whatever. Yeah. And I probably went 45 minutes or an hour, which I should not have. That's way too long for high schoolers and that kind of stuff. But I was just like, it's way too weighty to just it just feels irresponsible to only spend that much time, which is why we're doing this right now.
Absolutely. And this is the catch-all. It's the catch-all. Yeah. It is.
Yeah.
Because there was definitely some parts that I don't want to get misinterpreted, and I don't want to come off harsh, and I want to extend grace and love. But at the same time, as I said at the very end, you cannot measure grace without measuring truth. So like you have to have truth in order to measure how much the grace is. And so like you can't know how much you've been forgiven until you know how much you failed. And so this is a little bit of that, where it's like to the lengths that Jesus is going to go to change the world, and to the lengths that his heart is so into the Father's heart that he's not going to look lustfully at anyone. He is not going to let love be twisted. He's going to be selfless his entire life. That's ultimately what lust is selfish living. It's leveraging the world for your own gain or another person or anything. You look lustfully at anything. And then he's not going to be angry with the world even when they hurt him, even when things go poorly, even when it's not justified even. And then he's also, he's not going to give up on us, even though he has every right to divorce us. He doesn't. He chooses to come and to make a new covenant. And then the last thing is he's a God that's faithful and true, and what he says is trustworthy. And it's just beautiful when you realize like that's all Jesus is trying to do, is to get you to see the difference between what he's doing versus what and how that's good.
I think a way to phrase it is everything here is something that in Revelation 21 God is trying to wipe away. You shouldn't be comfortable with just drawing the line at murder or adultery, because in when the new heavens and the new earth rejoin, and when God makes this utopian society, this place where there's no more hurt and pain. There's no more hurt and pain because there's no more anger.
Yep.
There's no more like cause for murder or fighting or whatever.
Yeah, it's powerful. So what's the next question? What do you think?
Okay. I typed in, I don't know if you guys know this yet, or if you've jumped around, you maybe haven't heard this, but we use ChatGPT to write the questions for these, because it hasn't sat in on our sermon meetings and on our sermons and whatever. So it gets to ask 10 unbiased questions.
Yeah.
So we can be surprised by them sometimes. I asked it the give me 10 questions on this, and they were all just kind of like the answers, like the text itself answers it. You're like, that isn't helpful at all. So I typed in historical background questions.
Yeah.
So buckle up.
I'm ready.
So Jesus talks about murder to a bunch of Jews who have a commandment about murder. What were the prevailing attitudes towards violence and aggression in the crowd? And the people in general.
Well, I mean, one, if you're going to go like to their history, murder and killing was not the same thing. They waged wars, they took over, they did stuff. So like they did not mind to do that as long as it was justified. Murder is normally just quantified a little differently. There's conversations and complexities to that. But,
like we have the difference between that today is manslaughter and homicide.
Yeah.
Manslaughter is like
or self-defense.
You were
Mm-hmm.
It's like you were reckless, but homicide is like you
intentionally
wanted to kill that person.
And so I think there's some complexities, but the main thing they're trying to point out, and the main thing that's being juxtaposed in this is the concept of justice. Mm-hmm. And so anger is when you feel justified to feel a certain way. Mm-hmm. And so if someone wrongs you, you've heard it said, you're allowed to be angry with them to the degree that they have wronged you, if that makes sense.
Up until murder.
Eye to an eye.
Yeah.
So it's like, so it's this concept of like, no, like you're justified to be angry because they did wrong you, or this did happen, or this is whatever. And a lot of times I like to use modern day illustrations to think about this, because Romans are around. And so they're doing dumb things. Like they are idiots. But he says brothers. And so the way that they're going to hear that is other Israelites.
Yeah.
And so it's other Israelites that he's mainly trying to now, of course, we know that he means brothers as the world, but at that point, they're not going to hear that.
He's looking at his countrymen when he's saying this, even though it's for us too.
This is people that cut corners in business deals that cost you money. This is someone that cuts you off in traffic. This is someone that wakes you up in the morning and when you earlier than you exactly like being obnoxious or loud or playing loud music at night when you can't sleep. This is someone that just gives you terrible service at a restaurant and is just being annoying. And it really is kind of those small interactions where you are and you feel justified to be angry, like to be frustrated. And in the culture of that is you were okay to do that if they hurt, if they took, if they did something dumb and killed one of your animals on accident, or if they accidentally did something that damaged something of your property or hurt you or someone else, like there was an active understanding. The problem with this, and we all know this, is a lot of times people do things ignorantly. It's not necessarily a lot of times a vindictive thing. And so for me, when I read this and I put my own situations on it, I recognize why Jesus is calling it back to anger, because all it is most of the time is you're in the way of what I want to do, and you're keeping me from doing what I need to get done, and you're hurting the things that I have. You're breaking my stuff, and stop it.
Yeah.
I'm more important than whatever is going on in your life, obviously. And if you knew that, you wouldn't do that, like type of thing. Yeah. Or you're devaluing me, therefore I get to devalue you. Or you're not prioritizing me, so then I get to, basically take out you. And what ends up happening is it basically makes everybody their own little island, and they're just trying not to bump into everybody else, rather than feeling like you're on the same team, pulling in the same direction with the same purpose. And so when Jesus says, you've heard it said, not this, but anger, he's calling them back to value the other person, even when they're doing something wrong. And it really does flip everything kind of upside down, where it's not like hey, just get along.
Yeah.
It's a no, value and love your brothers.
Yeah.
And that is just completely different than just this idea of like, get along and don't fight.
Yeah. And that's... Like you see that come out when you look at ancient Jews in the first century around the time of Jesus, and they're like these raggedy-daggedy Samaritans and these razzle-frazzle Romans, whatever. Yep. And they're just like angry at everybody and think everybody's worse than them and God's on their side and not on the other people's side. And they've had this attitude for a long time.
Yeah.
But you watch God at the beginning, and God didn't make two Israelites. He made two humans.
Yep.
And then he calls somebody who's definitely not an Israelite, because they haven't been invented yet.
Yep.
He calls Abram to become Abraham, who's the father of Israel. And Yeah. Anyway, and he calls Rahab and he calls all these outsiders, and even the blessing before Israel even exists, that is prophetically about Israel, is that through them all the other nations of the earth will be blessed. But it seems like
They're getting
they
in the
think
way.
they'll be blessed by being the dirt in the little ridges in my boots.
Yep.
Like they'll be blessed by me being in charge, rather than it's my job to bless them right now with what I have. Feels like if we were in charge of the world and we legislated the 10 Commandments over, and maybe the other 600, whatever, over all the other nations, then they'd be blessed. Maybe.
I mean, you see this completely in the way that the Acts 1, when the disciples watch Jesus ascend, and then they literally sit there and are waiting. Right before he leaves, they're like, so this when you're bringing the kingdom? Like, is this when you take over? They're still thinking military. Like, after everything that goes down, after all that happens, they're still like, so this is the time we like throw Rome out and you could like march in and take over? And he's like, no, in fact, I don't want you to leave the city and just chill here for a little while, for a couple days, because you're going to need this guy to come, the advocate, the Holy Spirit. And the first thing they do is they stand up and they preach, and it's in all these languages. It's in all the languages of the people. And everybody hears it in their own native tongue. And it's just this wild idea, which that's a whole nother discussion on speaking in tongues. It's not an angelic language in this first sign of the Spirit, but it's actually just languages that others can understand.
And if you heard Trevor just say angelic languages and you're like, what are these guys into? It sounds like some non-biblical stuff. That's where I grew up, and that's where I felt like I was for a long time. Just go ahead and read 1 Corinthians 12 and 14. And why do you need an interpreter if it's in a known language?
Yep.
And why does it say if I speak in the tongues of angels but don't have love, I'm just a clanging cymbal? What is that?
Yep.
Why? Anyway, okay.
So we're taking that from the Bible. It's why the Spirit speaks in noises and groans and things that even our hearts and our minds can't.
Or only our hearts and our minds, but not our
mouths.
Processors.
It's literally larger than our soul, is the way I kind of act. But the whole point of that thought is just that the disciples are still figuring this out.
Yeah.
Like 3 years later. So like Jesus is laying this down, and you and I are just like, the cultural impact of this, they don't fully get it. Like they're still just like, okay, so you want us to play nicer in the sandbox. And they're like, no, we're trying to make a new sandbox. Like
don't be less mean, be more loving.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
when I taught this to those high schoolers, the first thing I did, the first 10 minutes, was just setting up why rules like this are important. It's not because we hate rule breakers and we want to whatever. It's not just niceties. It's like the Exodus. They were enslaved to Egypt for 400 years, and God ran in there and rescued them. But all they've known for every living generation of them that he rescued is Egypt. So how do we make this new community safe from Egypt, which is over there? How do we make it not turn into Egypt, because that's all you guys know? Okay, here are the rules on how to do that. And when it's more about character, it's more what God wants, and it's more powerful, and it's more about the undercurrents and the motivations of what's happening. That is what the 10 Commandments have now been turned into. This is Egypt again. This just holds back the worst of it. And God is like, no, I don't want new rules. I want new hearts.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's so hard about all this stuff. And, it's tricky because when you read it, it's so easy to weaponize these verses. Just turn them into just...
And that's what you were saying you grew up with in your youth group all the time.
Yes.
Which I heard a good amount too.
I mean, just the lustful side, like gouge your eyes out and cut your hands off. I just remember my, pastors like in my life that would just turn that into basically like, you do this, you're the worst, and like the divorce package, like just being talked about and like shaming anyone that had been divorced in the, early 90s. And it was just horrible.
And it's what's true about that is that Jesus is aiming at a little shock and awe, not out of nowhere, but out of truth. Like, hey, divorce really hurts people. Stop doing it so flippantly. And hey, anger really hurts people, and it hurts me when I can see your thoughts and I know you're angry at other people who I love.
Yep.
and like all these things. It should not make you feel good about yourself that you're angry. So there's some truth to that, but it's so weaponized that it's like,
Oh yeah.
it seems like you're irredeemably bad.
And it's
or
judgy. Like the only way
Jesus
that
has to work extra hard to love you if you're angry, which is.
I think what we normally, and I didn't say this in the sermon, this is the perfect place. Whenever I read this stuff, I think we naturally make it all about us.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we do. But really what Jesus is trying to do is to create a place that for you and I to go. It's a new place. And and the concept of like, think about it if you walked into a room where the 4 negative sides of this was in it, and that's all the room was, Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And then you walked out of that room and you walked into the other room, which were only the 4 positive things. Those are the only 4 things you're allowed to do. Jesus is basically saying this new kingdom has none of that and only this.
It's only going to be that second room.
It's only going to be that second room. And for us, we're like, I don't think I can do it. But he's like, I'm trying to paint a picture for you of what it's going to be like, simultaneously knowing, though, that you and I can't switch rooms.
Yeah.
Like
he has to let us in.
He has to let us in. Exactly.
Yeah.
And he has to create that space for us to go.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, I'm like, this is why it's hard, because we feel trapped when we read this. I'm trapped in lust. I'm trapped in anger. I'm trapped in brokenness. I'm trapped in lies. And I wish I wasn't. I don't want to be in this room anymore. And the point of this is what we're getting to in like a chapter, basically. But it's the forgive my sins as the Father forgives mine. Forgive my debts, and I'll forgive the people around. It's like this concept of like forgiveness enters into the narrative for the first time, and it starts to reveal what's going to happen. It's no longer going to be by righteousness, but by faith. And it's going to change the whole narrative. It is not going to be about a list. It's going to be about a relationship. And this list is not an invitation for judgment or brokenness, even though it does point to that in us. It's actually a beautiful like mosaic of where God is going to take us through Jesus.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing. It really is.
Last
question. One more question.
Yeah, one more.
I know.
I'm gonna go for this one because this is probably one of the touchier ones.
Yeah.
Talk to us about the prevailing views on divorce and marriage in Jewish society, and how that compares to what Jesus is saying overall about divorce, and probably saying to us.
So I had some lines in here in my sermon that I'll just reread as kind of like a point of this. Faithfulness and reconciliation is the gospel.
Yeah.
That's the gospel. Like that in the nutshell, that's what's happening. It's Jesus reconciling us and showing that God has been faithful from the beginning and that was the plan. John 1:1. And it's one of those things that marriage displays that at its core when it's at its best. What it does. Marriage is supposed to display Jesus. The problem is when 2 people combine their lives in marriage, in a covenant, there is no way to escape it without damage, without collateral damage. There's just no way to do it.
Yeah, Genesis 1 and maybe also 2 or 3 in different ways say that when 2 are joined in marriage, they become one flesh. And that's not literally true in like the attached twins sort of way. It is true in a sexual way, and it is true in a spiritual soul kind of way, in which no matter how justified or whatever a divorce is, you are just saying, hey, I'm going to remove some flesh. Yeah. That will never be painless.
And then here's what's so complicated about this, because if you stuck past this point and you have gone through a divorce, please hear my heart. There is so much grace, and you should not feel like the church is not for you or that you have missed out on what God is offering in any way. But if you're being real with yourself and you're listening to this, you know this. Even the worst marriage even the worst marriage that had abuse and was not good and whatever, it still has a damaging effect because there was a desire, a longing for it to be healthy that wasn't there. And then the person that squandered the opportunity or abused the opportunity, it's intense. It just becomes something that we know in our minds that marriage, when it's good, it's good.
Mm-hmm.
And when it's not, it's painful.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other side of it is that sometimes, guess what? People are selfish.
Yeah.
And marriage takes selfless love to work. And so why it displays Jesus is because it's so hard. It's hard to be married.
Yeah.
And that's not just because I'm so difficult, or Katrina, if you're watching this, there's no way you're watching this, but I am married to one of the most gracious, kind, forgiving, loving people on the planet. I am, and I can say that with honesty. And she and I feel like I love her to the nines, the best of my ability. And there are still seasons where it is difficult. It's hard, and
Mm-hmm.
I get it. And I think what Jesus is more trying to emphasize is you are squandering and abusing what marriage ultimately gives. And that is a glimpse, a profound mystery is what it says in Ephesians. I am talking about the Christ and the church. Jesus and the church is the profound mystery of marriage.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful idea that we are actually experiencing what it's like. Timothy Keller says marriage is all marriage is a promise that I will be with you today. And I have a promise to have an appointment with you in a month. And I have a promise to have an appointment with you in a year. And I have a promise to have an appointment. And your promises, it's just following through on your promise. That's all it is. It's not your feelings. It's not what you get out of it. It's not how much they add to your life or what they give. It is just you, man or woman, saying, I promise to stay with you. Again, ridiculous circumstances, tons of painful things can happen. Unfaithfulness can occur. But that's why it's so painful when it breaks, because what it could be, what it can be, is so special. I have a saying that I say all the time. When you choose to love somebody to the depth that you choose to love somebody, you are simultaneously giving them that depth to hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you are.
Yeah.
When Jesus chooses to love the world, he offers himself, Philippians 2, to the degree of being completely humiliated, wrongly convicted, beaten, hung on a cross, and killed. That's how much he loved the world. He was willing to open himself up to that level of pain to love. Marriage is that display at its core. That's why it's hard. That's why it's hard.
It's so vulnerable, but the vulnerability both lets in pain and lets in love, and it's all based on how the other person reciprocates.
You're going to say it this week, so I don't want to steal it, but love never constrains. It always expands. It always expands. It doesn't have limits. It expands. When I had my first child, I didn't have to split the love that I had with my wife to love my son. It just immediately met the need. And in marriage, when you deeply love and you continue to be faithful and you follow through, your love grows. Your ability to love grows. It is a natural thing that God has put in the world for that reason, a display of a growth tool of love. It's amazing. It really is. But to learn how to love is hard.
So hard.
So hard. And it's tricky. So, well, this has been really good, Ryan, and I really appreciate you. Those are good questions. And if any of you have more questions about some of the other sections in here, or you want some more information, or we missed something, or you want us to dive a little deeper on a specific verse, put it in the comments, send us an email, get in touch with Ryan, and we'll try to make that happen. As always, it's great if you want to subscribe or leave a review. Or share this with a friend. We always appreciate it, getting the word out there. We love having these conversations and continue to offer greater learning. So, thanks again, Mom, for watching. And
thanks, Mom. Happy birthday, Mom.
Hey,
July 3rd. It's a little old.
Well, you know, we're on time with everything.
Yep.
Have a great and glorious day, Lord. We'll see you later.
See ya.